I'm Wendy from shinyhappyworld.com, and today I'm going to show you the last step in making a quilt, squaring up the edges and adding the binding. That's what cleans up those raw edges all the way around. So I've got the finished quilt here. It's all been quilted, the whole surface of it, and now it's time to trim away these extra edges, the extra batting, the extra backing, and also get things nice and square. So for that I'm going to use my big ruler and rotary cutting tools. And I'm just going to lay it along this first edge. And cut that one. And then I'm going to turn it so that I'm always working kind of away from myself. And I'm going to line up the ruler so that one of my lines is right at the edge of that fabric there. So now I know I'll get a perfectly perpendicular cut. So I'm going to cut this one. And then I'm going to cut this long edge. And now I am going to work off of this end and make sure that I'm getting a nice perpendicular cut. And then one more. That looks good. Oh, I need to shift it over a little bit. One of my strips is a little bit shorter than the other, so this is a good time to correct that. Okay, so now my quilt is all squared up and all trimmed around the edges. Now I've got a binding strip. I cut this strip 2¼ inches wide and joined it together on the diagonal so that when it folds, instead of having one big fat place of seam allowance building up and making a really bumpy part there, this spreads that extra seam allowance out so I can fold it here and I don't have one really big bumpy part. And at the end, I also cut my last end of the strip, also cut on the diagonal at a 45-degree angle, and then I folded that edge in and pressed it and then folded it back in half. So I have an end that looks like this. And I'm going to put that end right along the edge of my quilt here so that all my raw edges line up. And I'm going to take it to the machine and start sewing. Okay, so I'm ready to sew, and I did not start right at the end. You don't want to start right on the corner. There's some funkiness that we have to do at the corners, and it's not a good place to start. So you want to start somewhere along the side, get all your raw edges lined up, and then using a 1/4 inch seam allowance so that the edge of your presser foot is lined up with all those raw edges, sew it on. And just go slow. Stop whenever you need to realign it. I don't pin this because it's impossible to predict. You'll see when we get to the corners why we don't pin. Okay, we're coming up on the corner now. When you get to the corner, I'm going to mark, this is where the edge of the quilt is with my fingernail there. That's going to be a little guide for me. And I want to stop sewing 1/4 inch in from that spot. And I'm going to back stitch. And then take the quilt out of the machine. Go ahead and cut your thread. Take it out. Now this is where it gets tricky, but this is how you get a nice mitered corner. I'm going to take it over here so it's in the light and try and keep my hands out of it. So you fold that back, your binding strip back, so that you have a diagonal line, again a 45-degree angle, and right here is the corner of your quilt. So fold that back, and then holding it in place, fold it forward so that that back fold lines up with the back edge of the quilt. And now be careful and hold all of it together. Get it back under the machine. And we're going to back stitch all the way to the back edge of the quilt now. And then start sewing forward. And I'll show you that again a couple of times. I'll show you that for all the corners. So we're going to go forward. Get everything lined up. And get everything lined up. And we're coming up on our next corner. So again, I'm going to just kind of mark with my fingernail right where the edge of the quilt is, so I know to stop 1/4 of an inch before I get to that point. Back stitch and take it out of the machine. Cut your threads. Turn it, 1/4 turn. Then fold it back. Get that out of the way. Hold it back so that you have a 45-degree angle coming right up, pointing to the edge of the quilt. That's the edge of the quilt right there. Then I'm going to hold that angle in place, pull the binding forward, make that fold line up with the back edge of the quilt. Everything's ready to go. Hold it all in place. Get it back under the presser foot. Back stitch all the way to the edge of the quilt. And then go forward. And we'll go to the next corner. But that's why you don't pin it, because it's hard to know exactly how much fabric all that folding is going to take. You can't really plan for that. So you just rearrange every couple of inches. Okay, coming up on the corner. So here's the edge of my quilt. I'm going to stop 1/4 of an inch before that. Back stitch, take it out, turn it sideways, fold it so it's a 45-degree angle, out of the light there, 45 degrees to the corner of the quilt there, flip it forward, get everything lined up, all looks good, that back fold is lined up. Tuck it under the presser foot, back stitch to the edge of the quilt, and then stitch forward. We're almost done. Okay, we're coming up on the last corner. Here's the edge. Stop 1/4 of an inch away, back stitch, take it out of the machine, turn it, fold it so it's a 45-degree angle, hold that in place, fold it back down over that. That fold is lined up with the edge, and one more time. Under here, back stitch, and then go forward. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to sew right past, we're going to sew right over top of this folded edge here. And we're going to make sure that we sew all the way past this open end of the triangle. So I'm putting my finger where I need to stop sewing. And back stitch. And we are done with the machine work. Now I'll show you the next part is all by hand. So our quilt has the binding sewn all the way around the edge, and we've got this extra tail. The first thing we need to do is cut that off, and I'm just going to cut it at an angle, again, just so we don't have one big bumpy spot where it ends. And now we're going to take all of this and we're going to fold it around, and you're going to sew by hand on the back, and I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm going to turn it sideways because I work better that way. So I folded it around, I've got my needle threaded. I'm going to just, first of all, start that just by running it into the middle of the batting there. So I've got my needle coming out right near my thread line. I'm going to fold this over, and now I'm just going to take little stitches in my binding, right in that fold there. Take a little stitch there, and then I'm going to come down, take a little stitch in the bottom one. This is just like the ladder stitch, and it's going to be completely invisible. Take a little stitch through the fold of the binding. Oops, went through the back. Just a little stitch through the fold of the binding. Make sure you don't keep the threads in there. And then a little stitch through your quilt. Now I'm not going through to the front of the quilt, I'm just going into the batting part with these. And I've got my finger underneath so I can feel if I poke through. And then go into the binding. And you're just going to work your way slowly down the quilt. And it doesn't take nearly as long as you'd think it would. And really, this is why we have TVs. So you can sit, throw in a movie, and do some of the handwork on this. And you're just going to work your way all the way around the quilt, stitching that binding down. And I'm going to just put that needle down for a second. So you can see the stitches on this side are completely invisible. And on the other side, you've also got just a nice, clean, folded edge. And I want to show you a couple of things. I want to show you where we started and stopped. By having that fold there, when we fold this over, now you're going to have a nice, clean edge right here, too. And if you need to, you can throw a couple of little stitches in there, but I rarely need to. And I also want to show you what the corners are going to look like. So when you fold these corners, they are going to turn pretty much on their own. Once you turn them right side out, they turn into a perfect little mitered corner. And again, if you need to, if you feel like you ought to, you can throw a couple of stitches in that fold, but it really is going to hold its own. And let me show you the back. That also, you just fold one side over and then fold the other side over, and you get a nice little miter on the back as well. So once this is done, once you've got it sewn on and you've done all that funkiness around the corners, everything else is just a little bit of handwork, and it gives you a really beautifully finished quilt. So that's how you finish your quilt. Attach the binding the first time around on the machine, and then you've just got some handwork to do. It doesn't take a lot of skill, all it takes is time. And once you've invested all of that money into the fabric of the quilt and then all of your time into putting it together, it's really, really worth taking the time to put a nice finish on it. I'm Wendy from ShinyHappyWorld.com. I'll see you next time.